Humans choke the life out of the galaxy's apex predators and make them beg for table scraps like dogs. Captain Andrew Jackson understood this as he stretched his muscular limbs, awaking from a 6-month cryosleep aboard the survey ship Odyssey. He scratched his scruffy beard and peered out the reinforced viewport. The orange and green swirls of Ferenginar Prime filled his vision, homeworld of the profit-obsessed Ferengi Alliance. Jackson's lips curled into a frown. The Ferengi made useful trading partners, but their exploitative business practices strained diplomatic relations with the Terran Consortium. Jackson's mission was critical: document Ferenginar's unique ecosystem for the Consortium's exobiology database. This data would help maintain humanity's dominance in an increasingly dangerous galaxy. Jackson snorted. Child's play for an experienced explorer like him. Suddenly, alarms screeched through the Odyssey's metal corridors. Jackson leaped into the pilot's chair, hands flying over touchscreens. An unidentified ship approached on an attack vector, weapons hot. Attention, unidentified vessel. This is Captain Andrew Jackson of the Terran Consortium. Stand down or be destroyed. Static crackled in response. Without warning, the mystery ship opened fire. The Odyssey lurched as neutron beams sliced off its comms array and fusion engines. Red warning lights flashed as the ship spiraled towards Ferenginar's jungle surface. Jackson gritted his teeth and barely managed to transmit a distress call before the comms went dead. He strapped into the crash couch and braced for impact. If he didn't survive this, the Consortium would lose a key asset in the galactic power struggle. But Jackson had no intention of dying today. He was human, and humans didn't break that easily. Jackson's eyes snapped open as he regained consciousness, finding himself suspended upside down in his safety harness. His ears rang with a high-pitched whine, and a dull ache pulsed through his skull. The emergency lights flickered erratically, casting an eerie glow on the wrecked bridge of the Odyssey. Acrid smoke assaulted his nostrils, and through the fractured viewport, he spotted flames dancing amidst the twisted metal. With a grunt, Jackson fumbled with the harness release and dropped unceremoniously onto what used to be the ceiling. He pushed himself up, ignoring the protests of his battered body, and stumbled towards the wall compartment. Inside, he found a fire extinguisher and a first aid kit, both miraculously intact. The bridge door was jammed, its frame warped by the impact. Jackson took a step back and delivered a forceful kick, sending the door flying open with a metallic screech. Smoke billowed into the corridor, and he coughed as he navigated the tilted passageway towards the cargo bay. His mind raced as he moved, hoping against hope that the expedition's all-terrain vehicle had survived the crash. If it was still functional, it could be his ticket out of this mess and his best chance at finding help. Jackson's wrist computer chirped, and he glanced at the screen. The crash site's coordinates glared back at him, a small comfort knowing that they had been transmitted in the distress call. However, his relief was short-lived as he remembered the ship's long-range communications array had been destroyed. He had no way to contact his crew in orbit or the Consortium. The cargo bay doors loomed ahead, and Jackson paused to grab a few emergency rations and extra power cells. With a deep breath, he hit the release button, and the doors ground open, revealing the dense, forbidding jungle beyond the clearing created by the Odyssey's violent landing. There, amidst the debris, sat the all-terrain vehicle. It had taken a beating, with dents and scratches marring its sturdy frame, but it appeared operational. Jackson took a step towards it, his heart pounding with a mix of relief and apprehension. Suddenly, a deep guttural growl emanated from the tree line, freezing Jackson in his tracks. The sound sent a chill down his spine as he realized that something massive was moving through the foliage, heading straight for the crash site. The jungle seemed to come alive, the leaves rustling and branches snapping under the weight of the approaching creature. Jackson's hand instinctively reached for his sidearm, his mind racing to identify the potential threat. He had no idea what kind of predators called this alien world home, but one thing was certain: he was about to find out, and he'd have to rely on his wits and training to survive this close encounter on a hostile planet. Jackson lunged for the all-terrain vehicle, his heart pounding as the creature's growls grew louder. He hauled himself into the driver's seat and slammed his fist on the power button. The engine roared to life. Jackson swung the floodlights towards the jungle, illuminating the trees in a harsh white glare. The lights caught a massive shape shoving through the undergrowth. Jackson squinted, then recoiled. It was an Arctanis, a monster he had only seen in briefing files. The beast was built like a tiger, but with 6 muscular legs, armored scales, and a whip-like tail studded with spikes. Saliva dripped from its fangs as it fixed its eyes on Jackson. Arctanis were supposed to be solitary hunters. This one must have been drawn by the crash, and now it had found its prey. The creature roared, the sound hitting Jackson like a physical blow. Then it charged, its claws gouging the earth. Jackson wrenched the controls for the plasma cannon and opened fire. Bolts of superheated matter slammed into the Arctanis, scorching its hide. It screamed in pain and fury but didn't even slow down. "Shit, shit, shit," Jackson chanted. The beast was almost on top of him. He engaged the vehicle's autopilot and threw himself clear a split second before the creature rammed the vehicle head-on. The front end crumpled like tissue paper under the Arctanis's bulk. Jackson hit the ground hard, rolling to a stop a few meters away. He pushed himself up, gasping, and found himself staring straight into the Arctanis's eyes. Its lips peeled back from its fangs as it stalked towards him. Desperation rising in his throat, Jackson drew his sidearm and fired at the creature's face. The plasma bolt sparked off its scales, only making it angrier. The Arctanis gathered itself to pounce, muscles bunching beneath its armored skin. Green plasma fire suddenly stitched across the beast's flank. It howled and convulsed, its claws raking the air. More plasma bolts hammered into it, driving it to the ground. 5 armored figures emerged from the jungle, the muzzles of their rifles tracking the fallen Arctanis. Ferengi insignia gleamed on their pressure suits. The one in the lead crossed to Jackson and yanked off his helmet. Sharp teeth flashed in a green-skinned face, and his lobed ears twitched. "I am Corvus, First Ranger of the Ferenginar Apex Predator Control Corps. Looks like you've had a rough day, Pinkskin." Jackson could only nod mutely. "Let's get you back to base so we can sort this out," Corvus said. "We have a lot to discuss." Jackson watched as the Rangers secured the tranquilized Arctanis in a reinforced cage on the back of their hovercraft. He ducked into the wrecked Odyssey and grabbed his emergency pack, slinging it over his shoulder. The pack contained survival rations, a medical kit, and a compact toolkit, enough to keep him going for a few days in the field. He jogged over to the hovercraft, where Corvus was waiting. The vehicle was a rugged utilitarian design, with thick armor plating and all-terrain treads. A plasma turret was mounted on the roof, currently manned by one of the Rangers. As Jackson climbed aboard, Corvus said, "We received your distress beacon from the Commerce Station in orbit. Sounds like you had a run-in with some unfriendly visitors." Jackson nodded grimly. "Came out of nowhere and shot me down without warning. Any idea who they might be?" Corvus shook his head. "Raids like that have been happening more frequently. It's bad for business, and the Ferengi Alliance doesn't like that. We're investigating, but so far, no leads." The hovercraft rumbled to life and surged forward, leaving the wreckage of the Odyssey behind. As they sped through the jungle, Jackson couldn't help but marvel at the vibrant colors and strange, twisted trees flashing past. Ferenginar was a far cry from the sterile, orderly worlds he was used to. Before long, they arrived at the Rangers' base. It was a fortified compound surrounded by humming laser fences with squat, reinforced buildings and watchtowers bristling with sensors and weapons. But what caught Jackson's eye were the numerous heavily reinforced enclosures, each containing an Arctanis. "Quite the menagerie you've got here," he said to Corvus. The Ferengi Ranger grimaced. "Necessity. In the past few years, the Arctanis have started ranging far outside their usual hunting grounds. They've been attacking settlements, caravans, anything they can sink their claws into. We had to step up our game just to keep them contained." As they walked into the main complex, Corvus continued, "Vicious bastards and smart too. They adapt quickly to our tactics. If we hadn't established the Predator Control Corps, they might have overrun half the planet by now." Inside, a Ferengi xenobiologist treated the cuts and bruises Jackson had sustained in the crash, smearing them with a foul-smelling but effective healing salve. Once he was bandaged up, Corvus led him to the base's command center. Hollow displays covered the walls, showing detailed maps of the planet's surface. Red splotches indicated Arctanis activity, and Jackson was shocked to see how much area they covered. "This is the problem," Corvus said, pointing at the map. "The Arctanis territories are expanding at an alarming rate, and these," he brought up a series of graphs, "show the increasing frequency and severity of their attacks." Jackson studied the data, his brow furrowed. "What's causing this? Some kind of environmental stress?" "That's our theory," Corvus said. "Something is driving them out of their usual ranges, making them desperate and aggressive. If we don't figure out what it is and put a stop to it soon, we're going to have a full-scale crisis on our hands." He turned to Jackson, his eyes serious. "We could use your help. The Odyssey's sensors probably picked up data we don't have access to, and with your expertise in alien biology, you might be able to spot something we've missed." Jackson nodded. "I'll do what I can, but first I need to check in with my ship. Let them know I'm still in one piece." Corvus led him to the base's quantum entanglement communicator. Jackson input his ship's code, and after a moment Lieutenant Sanders' face appeared on the screen. "Captain, thank God you're all right," Sanders said, relief evident in his voice. "We thought we'd lost you." "Takes more than a rough landing to put me down," Jackson said with a wry smile. "What's your status?" "We took some hits, but we managed to jump to hyperspace and shake off that attacking ship. Main engines are acting up, though, so we're stuck in orbit until we can get them fixed." Jackson frowned. "Corvus says attacks like that have been happening more often lately. See if you can dig up any intel on who might be behind them." "Will do, Captain. What about you? What's the situation on the ground?" Jackson filled him in on what he'd learned about the Arctanis and the Rangers' efforts to contain them. "I'm going to help Corvus investigate what's causing their behavior to change. In the meantime, I need you to compile all the data we have on the Arctanis and these raids. Something strange is going on here, and we need to get to the bottom of it." "Understood, sir. I'll get right on it. Sanders out." As the screen went dark, Jackson turned to Corvus. "All right, where do we start?" The Ferengi Ranger grinned, showing his sharp teeth. "How do you feel about getting up close and personal with some Arctanis?" Jackson pored over the data Sanders had transmitted as the hovercraft sped through the dense Ferengi jungle. The unidentified raiders had hit both Consortium and Ferengi ships, focusing their attacks around the Arctanis hunting grounds. Scans hinted at advanced cloaking tech that let them avoid detection. Jackson looked up from his datapad as Corvus brought the vehicle to an abrupt halt at the top of a ridge. He followed the Ferengi's gaze, and his eyes widened. The valley below, which Corvus said had been a lush ecosystem mere months ago, was now a brown, desiccated wasteland devoid of life. "By the blessed exchequer," Corvus breathed. "I knew it was bad from the reports, but seeing it in person—" He shook his head. "This can't be natural. The decay rate is far too rapid. And look at the Arctanis." He pointed to a herd of the creatures milling about the dead zone's perimeter, looking thin and sickly. "I'd bet my lobes this is connected to their expanding hunting ranges and increased aggression." Jackson nodded grimly. "We need samples. Let's get down there." The team donned protective gear and made their way into the valley. As soon as they crossed into the barren expanse, Jackson's helmet filters picked up an acrid chemical scent that grew stronger the farther they went. Corvus's radiation meter started clicking like mad. Jackson checked his own scanner and swore. "I'm picking up toxic compounds saturating the soil and plant matter," he said, "and I've never seen anything like them in nature." "So someone is purposely poisoning the jungle," Corvus growled, "driving the Arctanis out and towards our cities. But who and why?" Jackson opened his mouth to reply when his comm crackled to life. "Captain, we've got multiple contacts entering the atmosphere near you," Sanders' voice rang out, laced with urgency. "They're not responding to hails, and they're running cloaked." "Acknowledged," Jackson barked. Corvus, we need to move now. Hostiles inbound. The Ferengi was already sprinting for the hovercraft, his team close on his heels. They had nearly reached it when a plasma bolt slammed into the earth beside them, showering them with molten dirt. Jackson looked up to see a trio of ships shimmering into view, their hulls a mottled grey. Emerald beams of destructive energy rained down around the fleeing Rangers. Jackson hurled himself into the hovercraft a split second before a plasma bolt took his head off. Corvus vaulted into the pilot's seat and gunned the engines. The vehicle leaped forward as more bolts hammered the ground behind them. "Jackson, man the turret!" Corvus yelled as he sent the hovercraft hurtling through the jungle. Jackson scrambled into the gunner's chair and swung the plasma cannon towards their pursuers. The weapon hummed as it spat sun-bright bolts back at the ships, but the raiders were too quick, juking and jinking to throw off his aim. The chase seemed to drag on for an eternity. The hovercraft's engines whined as Corvus pushed them to the limit. Jackson and the other Rangers fired continuously, but their foe always seemed to dance out of reach. Finally, they reached the healthy jungle. Corvus expertly wove through the dense foliage, using the towering trees to block the ship's sensor locks. After several more tense minutes, the engine sounds faded. Corvus brought the hovercraft to a stop and slumped back in his chair, breathing heavily. He turned to Jackson, his expression grim. "Well, human, it looks like you and I have even more to talk about now," he said. "Someone is trying to sabotage Ferenginar, and they clearly don't want us figuring out their game." Jackson nodded, his mind racing. This was bigger than either of them. "You're right. It's time we pooled our resources and got to the bottom of this." He met Corvus's gaze, determination hardening his features. "Before it's too late." The door to the command center slid open, and Jackson strode in, Corvus close behind. Sanders' face filled the main view screen, her brow furrowed with concern. "Captain, I've analyzed the sensor logs from the ships that attacked you," she said without preamble. "Their cloaking signatures and weapon profiles match the raiders who have been hitting Consortium and Ferengi vessels." Jackson frowned. "Any idea who they are?" Sanders nodded. "Based on the data, I believe we're dealing with Zantari mercenaries. They're known for their cutting-edge tech and taking on any contract, no questions asked." Corvus growled low in his throat. "The Zantari. Should have known they'd have their filthy claws in this. They've been a thorn in the Ferengi Alliance's side for years, hiring themselves out to anyone who wants to undermine their rivals' business interests." "So this is bigger than just ecological sabotage," Jackson mused, rubbing his chin. "If the Zantari are involved, it's economic warfare on a planetary scale." He started pacing, his mind racing. Think about it. Poisoning the jungles doesn't just disrupt the ecosystem, it damages Ferenginar's infrastructure. The Arctanis get driven out of their territories and start attacking settlements. Corvus picked up the thread, his eyes hard. "Which forces us to divert resources from trade to defense and containment. Our commerce grinds to a halt while we deal with the crisis." "Exactly," Jackson said, "and with Ferenginar weakened, the saboteurs' employers swoop in and take over key markets and trade routes. It's a brutally efficient plan." "But we still don't know who's pulling the strings," Corvus snarled, slamming a fist on the console. Sanders leaned forward. "Leave that to me. I'll tap my contacts in Consortium intelligence, see if they can follow the money trail, track down who hired the Zantari." Corvus grunted. "In the meantime, we need hard evidence of these poisoning operations. I'm going to set up surveillance on the dead zones, try to catch them in the act." "I'll come with you," Jackson said immediately. "An extra set of eyes can't hurt, and I want to get to the bottom of this as much as you do." Corvus flashed him a sharp-toothed grin. "Glad to have you on board, Pinkskin. Meet me in the armory at 0600. We'll gear up and head out." As the days passed, Jackson and Corvus worked tirelessly to unravel the conspiracy, coordinating with Sanders and the Rangers to gather evidence. But the situation on the ground was deteriorating rapidly. Reports flooded in of increasingly bold Arctanis attacks, the creatures adapting to the Rangers' containment strategies faster than they could be implemented. Jackson could feel the tension mounting, a sense of urgency crackling in the air. They were in a race against time, and every moment brought them closer to a tipping point from which there might be no return. Late one evening, as Corvus piloted their cloaked surveillance craft over the border of a dead zone, Jackson saw it, a shimmer in the air, a distortion that resolved into the angular shape of a Xantari ship. It hovered low over the jungle, nozzles on its underside spraying a sickly green mist that withered the foliage below. "There!" Jackson hissed, pointing. "That's got to be the toxin." Corvus snarled triumphantly. "Finally, let's see where this scum scuttles off to." He tailed the ship at a discreet distance, scanners recording its every move. The Xantari craft led them deep into the mountains, disappearing into a hidden hangar bay carved into a sheer cliff face. Corvus set them down on a narrow ledge and they climbed out, checking their weapons. "I'm reading multiple life signs inside," Jackson said, consulting his scanner. "And a lot of chemical storage tanks. This must be their main base of operations." "Time to crash their party," Corvus growled. They crept into the facility, sticking to the shadows. Voices echoed from ahead and they edged closer, hugging the wall. "Hit the Drogic shipping center next," a rough voice was saying. "Take out their distribution hub and that'll be another major player crippled." "What about the Arctanis?" another voice asked. "They're spreading faster than we anticipated. The Ferenginar Apex Predator Control Corps is getting suspicious." The first voice scoffed. "Doesn't matter. By the time they figure it out, it'll be too late. Ferenginar will be ripe for the taking, and the Commerce Authority will make sure we get our cut." Jackson and Corvus shared a shocked look. The Ferengi Commerce Authority itself was behind this. Corvus motioned toward a computer terminal. "See what you can pull off there, I'll cover you." Jackson nodded and darted over, his fingers flying over the keys as he hacked into the system. The evidence was damning. Shipment logs, financial records, encrypted communications. It all pointed to a shadowy faction within the Commerce Authority, seeking to destabilize their rivals and consolidate power. "I've got it," Jackson whispered over the comm. "We need to get this to the authorities now." Alarms suddenly blared throughout the complex. They'd been detected. "Time to go," Corvus yelled, opening fire as Xantari mercs poured into the room. They fought their way out in a hail of plasma bolts, the air thick with the stench of ozone and charred flesh. Panting, they leaped aboard their ship and rocketed into the night sky. "We have to get to the Commerce Authority headquarters," Corvus said grimly. "Confront those murderous suits with what we found, before it's too late." But as they approached the towering edifice in the heart of the capital, the sound of weapons fire and explosions reached their ears. Xantari ships strafed the building, green plasma scoring its surface. Corvus swore violently in Ferengi. "It's begun. The Authority is tearing itself apart." Jackson gripped the arms of his seat, jaw tight. The Ferengi civil conflict had turned hot, and the fate of Ferenginar hung in the balance. Plasma bolts and Arctanis roars fill the air as Jackson and Corvus battle through the chaos, engulfing the Ferengi capital. The once pristine streets are littered with rubble and scorch marks. Loyal rangers rally to Corvus, holding back the tide of mercenaries and mutated predators. Jackson's blood pounds in his ears as he fights alongside his Ferengi friend, determination etched on his face. They blast their way into the Commerce Authority headquarters, a towering edifice of glass and steel, now pockmarked by weapons fire. Alarms wail, and emergency lights flash as they storm into the central chamber. There, standing amidst cowering bureaucrats, is Diamond Brunt, the mastermind behind Ferenginar's suffering. "It's over, Brunt," Corvus snarls, leveling his plasma rifle at the treacherous Ferengi. "Your scheme has failed. Surrender now." Brunt's laughter echoes through the room, cruel and mocking. "You really think you've won, Ranger? You're nothing but a bunch of toothless watchdogs, too weak to do what's necessary for Ferengi prosperity." Jackson steps forward, holding up a data drive. "We have all the evidence of your crimes, Brunt. Poisoning the jungles, driving the Arctanis to attack, hiring Xantari mercenaries. It's finished." Brunt sneers, his lobes flushed with rage. "You understand nothing, human. Only I have the vision to lead the Ferengi to greatness. By destabilizing our world, I will rebuild it in my image, a glorious empire that will dominate the galaxy." Corvus bristles with fury. "You're insane, Brunt, and a traitor to your people." "Am I?" Brunt smirks. "Why don't you ask my loyal creations?" On cue, a terrifying roar shakes the building. The far wall explodes inward, revealing a horde of massive, mutated Arctanis. Their scales ripple with unnatural muscle, eyes blazing with chemically induced rage. Brunt's laughter rises above the screams of the fleeing bureaucrats. "Behold, my army of perfect predators bred to conquer. With them under my command, Ferenginar will be mine." The twisted creatures surge forward, tearing through the room with horrifying speed. Jackson and Corvus open fire, barely holding them back. Over the din, Jackson shouts into his comm unit. "Sanders, broadcast the evidence now, on every frequency." Instantly, every screen and hollow projector in the room flares to life, displaying the damning files. Brunt's recorded voice booms from the speakers, gloating about his plans. The Xantari mercenaries, seeing their employer's treachery laid bare, quickly turn tail and flee. Brunt's allies melt away, unwilling to be dragged down with him. Corvus rallies the Rangers, coordinating a fierce counterattack against the Arctanis. Jackson fights at his side, his quick wits and adaptability crucial in the desperate battle. Together, they manage to herd the beasts back towards Brunt's inner sanctum. They corner the seething Ferengi on his private landing pad, where a sleek shuttle waits. Brunt lashes out in a final, desperate gambit, grappling with Corvus at the platform's edge. Jackson watches in horror as they teeter on the brink. Suddenly, a massive Arctanis lunges from the shadows, seized Brunt in its jaws. The Ferengi screams as he's dragged into the shuttle, thrashing wildly. Jackson leaps forward, grabbing Corvus's hand just as the Ranger's grip slips. Together, they watch as the shuttle careens away, vanishing into the jungle with a distant explosion. The battle is over. The Arctanis, now directionless, are subdued by the Rangers' efforts. But as Jackson and Corvus survey the smoking ruins of the once proud city, they know their work is far from over. Emergency ships from the Consortium and other worlds descend to render aid, and the hard task of rebuilding begins. But amidst the rubble and ruin, a new hope rises. A hope forged in the unbreakable bond between a human and a Ferengi, who fought side by side against corruption and greed. A friendship that will light the way as their worlds face the challenges of a dangerous galaxy together. Jackson wiped the sweat from his brow as he helped Corvus wrangle the last of the mutated Arctanis into a reinforced containment unit. The beast thrashed and snarled, but the Ranger's tranquilizer darts soon had it slumping to the ground, unconscious. "So that's the last one in this sector," Corvus said, checking his wrist computer. "But there's still a lot of work to be done." Jackson nodded, surveying the scarred landscape around them. The once vibrant jungle was now a patchwork of barren earth and twisted, blackened trees, a testament to the destruction wrought by Brunt's machinations. Back at the Ranger base, they found Sanders hunched over a microscope, studying samples of Arctanis tissue. She looked up as they entered, her face lined with fatigue, but her eyes bright with determination. "I think I'm making progress on a way to reverse the mutations," she said. "But it's going to take time to synthesize enough of the counter-agent to treat all the affected creatures." Corvus clasped her shoulder. "Keep at it, Sanders. Your work is crucial to restoring the balance of our world." In the following weeks, Jackson and the Odyssey crew worked tirelessly alongside the Ferengi to rebuild and heal. They replanted forests, cleansed waterways, and helped to construct new habitats for the displaced wildlife. The Ferengi Commerce Authority, now under new leadership, poured resources into the recovery effort. Corrupt officials were arrested and stripped of their titles, replaced by visionary entrepreneurs who saw the value in a more sustainable and equitable approach to business. Everywhere they went, Jackson and Corvus were greeted as saviors by the Ferengi people. Their unlikely friendship had become a symbol of hope and unity in the face of adversity. But even as Ferenginar began to heal, troubling reports started to trickle in from across the quadrant. Arctanis, or creatures very much like them, had been sighted on worlds far from Ferengi space, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The implications were chilling. It seemed that Brunt, in his final spiteful act, had sold the secrets of the Arctanis mutations to the galactic underworld. Now, criminal factions were using the beasts as living weapons, sowing chaos and terror for their own gain. Jackson slammed his fist on the table as he read the latest intelligence report. "We can't let this spread any further. We have to stop it." Corvus nodded grimly. "Agreed. This is no longer just a Ferengi problem, it's a threat to the entire galaxy." They brought their case to the Consortium and the Ferengi Alliance, arguing for the creation of a dedicated task force to combat the Arctanis menace. It wasn't a hard sell. The potential for destabilization was too great to ignore. The Odyssey, newly retrofitted with cutting-edge Ferengi tech, would serve as their mobile command center. Sanders would continue her research aboard, working to develop a large-scale countermeasure to the mutations. As the task force prepared for their first mission, Jackson and Corvus stood on the Odyssey's observation deck, looking out at the stars. "We've got our work cut out for us," Jackson said. "Tracking down every black market Arctanis in the quadrant won't be easy." Corvus flashed a toothy grin. "No, it won't, but that's never stopped us before. Together we'll hunt them down one by one. We'll show them what real apex predators can do." Jackson clasped his friend's hand, feeling a surge of determination. The Arctanis had been designed to be the ultimate hunters, but they were about to learn that no beast was a match for the combined powers of human ingenuity and Ferengi tenacity. Their hunt was just beginning. Jackson ducked behind a rusted metal barrier as plasma bolts sizzled overhead. The stench of burnt flesh and ozone filled the air. Beside him, Corvus fired back, his shots precise and controlled. "I count 5 hostiles left," Corvus shouted over the din of battle. 2 at hour 12, 3 at 2 o'clock. Jackson nodded, popping up to squeeze off a few rounds. The gladiatorial arena shook with the sounds of combat, a far cry from the roaring crowds it usually hosted. When their task force had arrived on this frontier world, they had quickly discovered the arena's dark secret. The crime lord Zektar was using mutated Arctanis in brutal pit fights, enslaving the creatures with cruel shock collars. Infiltrating the arena had been easy enough. Jackson and Corvus had posed as wealthy gamblers, slipping into the VIP area during the night's main event. But when they had tried to free the Arctanis, all hell had broken loose. "Zektar's making a run for it," Corvus snarled, pointing towards a fleeing figure across the arena. Jackson gritted his teeth. They couldn't let the crime lord escape, not when he had vital information about the Arctanis trade. He glanced at Corvus, a plan forming. "Cover me, I'm going after him." Corvus nodded, laying down a suppressing fire as Jackson sprinted from cover. He wove between barriers, plasma bolts whizzing past. One singed his hair, but he didn't slow. Ahead, Zektar was almost to the exit. With a final burst of speed, Jackson tackled the crime lord, sending them both tumbling. They grappled on the ground, trading blows. Zektar was strong, but Jackson was quicker. He pinned the alien, twisting his arm behind his back. "It's over, Zektar," Jackson panted. "Your arena is finished." Zektar spat a curse, but Jackson held firm. Corvus jogged up, covering the crime lord with his rifle. "Good work, Jackson," he said, flashing a toothy grin. "Let's get this scum back to the Odyssey and see what he knows." As they marched Zektar away, Jackson couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Another Arctanis operation shut down, more innocent lives saved, but he knew their work was far from over. On the war-ravaged world of Helios Prime, they faced a different kind of horror. A rogue military faction, the Crimson Dawn, had unleashed mutated Arctanis on civilian populations, using the creatures as living weapons in a campaign of terror. Jackson and Corvus led the task force in a desperate mission to contain the Arctanis and negotiate a surrender with the Crimson Dawn. But as they fought through the rubble-strewn streets, the true scale of the atrocities became clear. They found survivors huddled in ruined buildings, their eyes haunted by the things they had seen. Children cried for parents who would never come home. The stench of death hung heavy in the air. In a tense standoff outside the Crimson Dawn's headquarters, Jackson and Corvus finally came face to face with the faction's leader, a grizzled veteran named Koth. The man's eyes were cold, his face scarred by a lifetime of war. "You think you can stop us?" Koth sneered, his hand resting on his holstered pistol. "The Crimson Dawn will never surrender. We will fight to the last man, the last breath." Jackson stepped forward, his own weapon lowered. "It doesn't have to be this way, Koth. Too many have died already. End this now and we can work towards a peaceful solution." For a long moment Koth was silent. Then slowly he nodded. "Very well, we will stand down, but know this. The wounds of this war will not heal easily." As the Crimson Dawn laid down their arms and the task force secured the Arctanis, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The horror he had witnessed on Helios Prime would haunt him for a long time to come. Back on the Odyssey, Jackson found Corvus in the observation lounge, staring out at the stars. The Ferengi looked tired, his usually sharp eyes dulled by the weight of their mission. "You did good today," Corvus said as Jackson sat down beside him. "Negotiating that surrender, it couldn't have been easy." Jackson sighed. "I just keep thinking about all those people, Corvus, the ones we couldn't save, the ones who had to watch their loved ones be torn apart by those things." Corvus placed a hand on Jackson's shoulder, a rare gesture of comfort from the usually gruff Ferengi. "We're doing everything we can, Jackson. Every operation we shut down, every Arctanis we contain, that's lives saved. Never forget that." Jackson nodded, drawing strength from his friend's words. Their bond had been forged in the heat of battle, tempered by shared loss and triumph. He knew that together they could face anything. But even as they took solace in their victories, a new threat was emerging. Whispers reached them of a shadowy cabal, a syndicate that was secretly funding the spread of the mutated Arctanis across the quadrant. As they dug deeper, the scale of the conspiracy became clear. The syndicate's influence reached into the highest levels of power, with agents embedded in governments, corporations, and even the consortium itself. They were ruthless, well-connected, and willing to go to any lengths to achieve their aims. Suddenly the task force found itself in the crosshairs. Assassins dogged their steps, saboteurs struck at their supply lines. Every mission became a deadly game of cat and mouse, never knowing who they could trust. But Jackson and Corvus refused to be intimidated. With the help of their loyal crew, they launched daring raids against syndicate strongholds, slowly piecing together the puzzle of their enemies' plans. The breakthrough came on a raid deep in syndicate territory. They captured a high-ranking operative, breaking them in a tense interrogation. The information they gleaned was critical. The location of the syndicate's main base, a heavily fortified space station hidden in the heart of an uncharted nebula. As they planned their final assault, Sanders burst into the briefing room, her face alight with excitement. "I've got it," she exclaimed, waving a datapad. "The cure for the Arctanis mutations, but we'll need to act fast to distribute it across the quadrant." Jackson and Corvus shared a look, the weight of the moment settling on their shoulders. This was it, the culmination of everything they had fought for. The fate of the galaxy itself hung in the balance. As the Odyssey and her fleet set course for the Syndicate's base, Jackson felt a sense of calm settle over him. Come what may, he knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be, at the side of his friend and partner, ready to face the greatest challenge of their lives. The final battle was about to begin. Jackson gripped his plasma rifle tightly as he charged down the narrow corridor of the Syndicate's space station, Corvus right beside him. Alarms blared, and red emergency lights flashed, casting eerie shadows on the metal walls. They ducked and weaved as a hail of laser fire erupted from the other end of the hall, the heat of the blasts searing the air around them. "Watch your left!" Corvus shouted, his voice nearly drowned out by the chaos. Jackson pivoted just in time to see a mercenary lunging at him with a vibroblade. He parried the strike with his rifle and delivered a crushing blow to the attacker's head, sending him crumpling to the floor. All around them, the task force clashed with the Syndicate's forces in a brutal, close-quarters battle. The din of weapons fire and the cries of the wounded filled the air. Jackson saw a ranger fall, clutching a smoking hole in her armor. Another was tackled by a hulking brute of a merc, disappearing beneath a flurry of fists. They pushed forward inch by bloody inch towards the heart of the station. Traps and automated defenses sprung up at every turn, electrified floors, hidden turrets, even a sealed chamber that threatened to vent them into the void of space. Each obstacle cost them dearly in time and lives. As they neared the central labs, a tremendous roar shook the deck plates beneath their feet. The sound was like nothing Jackson had ever heard before, a primal, savage cry that made his blood run cold. He exchanged a worried glance with Corvus. Suddenly, Sanders' voice crackled over the comm, laced with static and barely audible over the background noise of battle. "Jackson, Corvus, do you read me? We've breached the labs, but, oh God, the things they've done here—" Her transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by a burst of garbled screams. Jackson's heart seized in his chest. He looked to Corvus, saw his own fears reflected in the Ferengi's eyes. Without a word, they broke into a sprint, charging recklessly towards the labs. They burst through a set of heavy blast doors, weapons raised, and skidded to a halt at the site before them. The lab was a cavernous chamber filled with rows of containment cells and bubbling tanks of viscous green fluid. In each tank floated the twisted, malformed body of an Arctanis, their flesh warped and bulging with grotesque mutations. At the center of the room, Sanders and her team were pinned down behind a makeshift barricade, desperately fending off a pack of snarling, misshapen creatures that had once been Arctanis. These abominations were larger, faster, and more vicious than any they had encountered before, their hides bristling with spines, and their maws dripping with caustic slime. Jackson and Corvus leapt into the fray, their weapons spitting plasma at the monstrous predators. The creatures howled and thrashed as the bolts seared their flesh, but they kept coming, driven by an insatiable hunger and an unnatural resilience. One of the beasts lunged at Jackson, its jaws snapping inches from his face. He drove his rifle butt into its throat, feeling the crunch of cartilage, then fired point-blank into its skull. Another leapt onto Corvus's back, raking its claws across his armor. The Ferengi roared in pain and reached back, seizing the creature by the neck and hurling it against a tank with bone-shattering force. As the last of the creatures fell, Jackson rushed to Sanders' side. She was hunched over a console, her fingers flying across the keys as she downloaded the Syndicate's research data. "What have they done?" Jackson asked, his voice raw with horror and anger. Sanders shook her head, her face pale and drawn. "They've been experimenting on the Arctanis, trying to enhance their mutations, make them into living weapons. The things I've seen here, Jackson, it's beyond anything I could have imagined." A cold, hard knot formed in Jackson's gut. The Syndicate's depravity knew no bounds. They had to be stopped, no matter the cost. A sudden explosion rocked the lab, showering them with sparks and debris. Alarms shrieked with renewed urgency. The station's reactor core had been breached. They were out of time. "We've got the data," Sanders yelled over the din. "We need to go now." Jackson nodded grimly. "Corvus, take point. We'll cover the rear. Move." They fought their way back through the crumbling station, the corridors now choked with smoke and flame. Mercs and mutated Arctanis alike fled in terror, caught between the advancing task force and the impending destruction of the base. As they neared the hangar where their shuttle waited, a group of heavily armed figures blocked their path. At their head stood a tall, gaunt man with cold, dead eyes, the Syndicate's leader. "You've caused us a great deal of trouble," the man said, his voice like silk over steel. "But it ends here. You will not leave this station alive." Corvus stepped forward, his rifle leveled at the man's heart. "You're finished," he growled. "Your twisted experiments, your plans to sow chaos across the galaxy, it's over." The man laughed, a hollow, mirthless sound. "You have no idea what you're up against. The Arctanis were just the beginning. We have so much more in store for—" His words cut off in a wet, choking gurgle as a plasma bolt took him in the throat. Corvus stood firm, smoke curling from the barrel of his rifle. "Enough talk," the Ferengi snarled. All hell broke loose. The Syndicate's elite guard opened fire, their weapons stitching the air with deadly light. Jackson and the task force dove for cover, returning fire with everything they had. In the chaos, Jackson lost sight of Corvus. He caught glimpses of him through the smoke and the flash of weapons, a green fist slamming into a guard's face, a rifle butt cracking against a skull, a plasma bolt searing through armor and flesh. And then a cry of pain that cut through the din like a knife. Jackson's heart stopped. He knew that voice. He surged forward, heedless of the danger, his rifle spitting fire. He found Corvus slumped against a wall, a hand pressed to his side. Blood seeped between his fingers, pooling on the floor beneath him. Jackson fell to his knees beside his friend, his hands shaking as he tried to stem the flow of blood. Corvus's face was ashen, his breathing shallow and labored. "Hold on, Corvus," Jackson pleaded, his voice breaking. "Just hold on. We'll get you out of here, get you patched up. You're going to be okay." Corvus shook his head weakly, a sad smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "We both know that's not true, Jackson. This is it for me." Tears blurred Jackson's vision. He gripped Corvus's hand tightly, as if he could anchor him to life by sheer force of will. "So you can't die on me, you stubborn Ferengi," he choked out. "I need you. The galaxy needs you." Corvus coughed, a trickle of blood running from the corner of his mouth. "The galaxy has you, Jackson. You'll carry on the fight. Promise me. Promise me you won't let them win. Don't let our sacrifices be in vain." Jackson nodded fiercely, hot tears spilling down his cheeks. "I promise, Corvus, I swear it. We'll finish what we started. We'll make them pay." Corvus smiled, a genuine warm smile that lit up his face even as the life drained from his eyes. "I know you will, my friend. It's been an honor to fight by your side." His voice trailed off, his hand going slack in Jackson's grip. Jackson bowed his head, a sob tearing from his throat. Around him the battle raged on, but for a moment the universe narrowed to this single point of grief, of loss. Corvus was gone. The best friend, the bravest ally, the noblest soul Jackson had ever known. The galaxy would never be the same without him. A hand fell on Jackson's shoulder, startling him from his anguish. It was Sanders, her face streaked with soot and blood. "Jackson, we have to go," she said urgently. "The reactor's going critical. This whole place is about to blow." Jackson looked down at Corvus's still form, a newfound resolve hardening in his chest. He reached out and gently closed his friend's eyes, a final gesture of respect and love. Then he stood, his grip tightening on his rifle, and faced the remaining task force members. Their faces were grim, their eyes haunted by the horrors they had witnessed and the losses they had suffered. "For Corvus," Jackson said, his voice raw but steady, "for every innocent soul the Syndicate has harmed, we finish this, here and now." As one, they charged forward, a battered but unbroken band of heroes united in their grief and their determination. They fought with renewed ferocity, driven by the memory of their fallen comrade and the knowledge that the fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders. In the end, they emerged victorious, the Syndicate's leadership captured or killed, their station reduced to a field of shattered debris. But the cost had been high, and the scars would linger long after the wounds had healed. In the aftermath, as Sanders and her team raced to synthesize a cure for the Octanis mutations, Jackson threw himself into the work of hunting down the remaining rogue specimens and the remnants of the Syndicate's network. It was a daunting task, a never-ending battle against the darkness that threatened to engulf the galaxy. But through it all, Jackson carried the memory of Corvus with him, a constant reminder of the sacrifices that had been made and the promise he had sworn to keep. He would not rest until the galaxy was safe, until the legacy of his fallen friend was honored and upheld. And so, as the Odyssey set forth once more into the vast expanse of space, Jackson stood tall on the bridge, his gaze fixed on the stars ahead. The road would be long and hard, the dangers many and great. But he was ready, For Corvus, for the innocent, for the future of the galaxy itself, he would fight on. Always. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.